Welcome to Sundays with Dracula. Welcome to my house. Enter freely and of your own will. This is chapter 11 of Sundays with Dracula. I am Edward G. Pettit of the Rosenbach in Philadelphia, which is the home of Bram Stoker's Notes for Dracula. Over 100 pages of outlines, early plot ideas, and research notes compiled by the author over the 7 years he developed and wrote the book. It is an extraordinary record of the conception and development of a novel. We'll see a couple pages from Stoker's notes today. And joining me today as co-host is horror theater maker and soon-to-be published author, Josh Hitchens.
Josh, hi, everyone. Great to be back.
Good. All right. And I want to hear about this book you're working on in a few moments. And looking forward to breaking down this chapter with you, definitely.
Oh, yeah.
Because what we do here on Sundays with Dracula is delineate, explicate, elucidate Bram Stoker's novel about bloodsuckers in the 1890s, one chapter at a time for 27 weeks. I have a co-host or two each week creating a kind of conversational annotation of the entire novel. Bram Stoker's Notes for Dracula are one of the gems of the Rosenbach's collections, and while we're closed for the quarantine, you can go online and see some of our collections guides, as well as gallery gateways of past exhibitions and other virtual programs and courses we are creating. And let me give a plug for a couple courses. Our virtual courses have just begun. We have a course running right now called Black Women Writing. It is sold out. You can't do it. It's short stories from African-American women from the 19th century to the present. Sold out registration. It's really great. We have two more courses starting next week. One is a Ulysses course, Learning Ulysses Online, with Ulysses expert Robert Berry, an artist. He's the artist of Ulysses Scene, and that one will be really exciting. There's still a couple spots left in that class. 6 months reading Ulysses with a group of people. You can't go wrong there. And we have another course starting next week called Hogwarts at Home, Harry Potter and the Socially Distant Online course. Now, I know I'm plugging a Harry Potter course, right? And I'm not ignoring the elephant in the room of this course going live now. J.K. Rowling has said some really stupid, hurtful things lately. I am certainly not interested in supporting J.K. Rowling right now. But I think this course is certainly worth doing, because if you're interested in returning to your love of this book series, the Harry Potter book series, to celebrate that magical world that was and probably still is vital to you, I cannot think of a better way to do it than a deep dive into the entire series, especially while so many of us are still stuck at home. This course will do all 7 books over 8 months with this great University of Penn professor of children's literature, Melissa Jensen. This will be such a cool class. I highly recommend it. We're all about celebrating the books here, okay? Sundays with Dracula is free to you from the Rosenbach, but of course it costs money to create and operate shows like this. If you'd like to make a donation or become a member, then I get to keep making awesome shows like Sundays with Dracula. Go to our website, click on the support tab. Any amount helps. And I have an exciting Dracula-inspired course that I will talk about a little later. We're going to do a mid-break and talk about that then. And remember, during the show today, if you're watching live on Zoom, you can use the chat to talk among yourselves. But if you have a question for me or Josh, use the Q&A box. There's 2 in there already. Josh, what's new with you?
So there actually is something new with me. I'm very, very excited and honored, but I just signed a book contract with Arcadia Publishing. Arcadia Publishing also is known as the History Press, and they are the biggest publisher of local history books in the United States. And I have been wanting to write a book for a while, and I noticed that they did not have a book about the ghost stories of Delaware, which is my home state, because they have a whole Haunted America series. You've probably seen them in bookstores.
Yeah, you got a lot of books in you too, so I'm glad you're getting on the the book mill here.
I know, yeah. There's already a couple I want to write. But so yeah, I sent a proposal to them and I've chatted with them and they've approved it. So now I am contracted to write a book that I'm tentatively calling The Haunting of Delaware, Ghosts and Legends from the First State. My deadline is February 2021. So the next 6 months of my life are going to be spent researching and writing about ghost stories, which is my favorite thing in the world.
That
So,
is
yeah.
great. Are you from Delaware? I can't remember.
I am, yeah.
Okay.
I was born and raised in southern Delaware, Sussex County,
There's
and that's where I spent the first 18 years of my life until I moved up here to go to college and been here ever since.
These are great series that Arcadia puts out with History Press. Heavily illustrated, lots of images, and usually great text. And I know several people that write for them, and they're always exceptionally well-produced books. So congratulations. That is excellent. I can't wait for that. You're going to go probably next year? Yeah, okay. All right, good.
For sure.
All right. Excellent. Well, last week, Tucker and I did a little thing where we talked about little-known films of Dracula, or film adaptations, and ones that we also thought were very good too. And Josh, coming on this week, he wanted to talk about one in particular, well, an adaptation in particular. And Josh, what is that?
Yeah. So being a theater person, I wanted to share my favorite underrated play adaptation of Dracula, and it's one that most people probably never heard of. It is very rarely produced, probably because it doesn't have Dracula in the title. But I think it's one of the best. And it is called The Transylvanian Clockworks. And it is by Don Nigro. And it's published by Samuel French. And I'll post the link to it on the Sundays with Dracula Facebook group after this is done. But it's my favorite adaptation. Sorry, go ahead.
That name's familiar, Don Nigro. Where have I heard that?
He's an extremely prolific playwright. I think he's written over 100 plays. One of his other big ones is a play called Ravenscroft, which is a weird, strange twist on a murder mystery. But the Transylvanian Clockworks is one of my favorites because it is really, really true to the spirit of Stoker's novel and then expands upon it. It includes a lot of Stoker's actual text in the lines, but it sort of takes the subtext further and really gives new depth to all the characters, especially Mina and Lucy. And I just think it's an incredible piece. It's set in 1888. So, and it includes the idea of Jack the Ripper happening at the same time Dracula is. But there's a lot of twists and turns in it. The language is really beautiful. It's creepy. And the title, The Transylvanian Clockworks, you don't find out what it means until the very end. Okay. And it's really great, and I don't want to spoil that, but cool. I highly recommend checking it out. It distills the novel down to 7 characters, to Dracula, Jonathan Harker, Mina, Lucy, Dr. Seward, Van Helsing, and then a character of Peg, who's a maid. And it's fascinating. I highly recommend it. And yeah, I wanted to share that because I don't think a lot of people know about it.
Do you think, is it adapted from the novel? Does it take into account the early Dracula plays at all? How does it?
Yeah, it doesn't. It's definitely adapted from the novel and like using it for inspiration, but it does twist around the sequence of events a little bit. So there's some of it that happens in flashback, and takes what happens in the novel and kind of expands and elevates it in really interesting ways. Yeah, it's so cool.
That sounds really cool. Transylvania Clockworks?
The Transylvanian Clockworks.
Transylvanian Clockworks.
Yeah. Yeah.
All right. Yeah, I'm looking forward to reading that. I've never heard of it. It's just one I've never even come across. So it's a great title.
Yeah.
And yet not a great title in that, yes, people won't associate it with Dracula. Don't think that's what it is. Like, I was surprised to hear that it's pretty much an adaptation of Dracula. So, yeah. All righty. And what year is that from? Did I missed that?
Hold on. Let me look real quick. It originally 1977, revised in 1996.
All right. So it was a 70s play. Cool. All righty. Well, there's another interesting one. I'm looking forward to reading that. Of course, and I said there's a couple questions. Of course, one of the questions is from Annie, and she says, "What's today's cocktail?" As you can see right here, this is it's whiskey with hearing cherry liqueur. This hearing cherry is a kind of classic liqueur. I think this hearing company is even, you know, even has a royal patent. It's from, you know, it's from Holland, I think, but they also are liqueur makers to the Queen and all that. And it's rye whiskey, hearing liqueur, and a little Benedictine, because that is delicious, a little orange kind of flavored aperitif, and blood orange juice. And it is called, well, I was debating on whether we're calling it the Renfield Special, but I think I'm going to call it the Flyman. And in the notes, in Stoker's notes for Dracula, he several times refers to Renfield as only the Flyman. So it's the Flyman. And if you'll notice here up top there, on top of my blood orange, that's my flies on the toothpick. They're actually raisins, so I'm not going to be completely disgusting. Yeah, so raisins as flies, and the Flyman is today's cocktail. Are you drinking anything today, Josh?
I am just drinking coffee and water at the moment.
Okay. I also have iced tea and water on the side. Plenty more liquor to go. So, Chris Clayton actually asked about my shirt. This is the Dracula shirt from the Dracula store, from Dacre Stoker's Evolve, the Dracula store, and they have all sorts of awesome products on there. And this is the Dracula shirt. And as I mentioned last week, I like the way you can still see Dracula through the beard, even as I move. So,
spooky.
There, yeah. All righty. Josh and I are going solo today to talk about this chapter, but we do have some more special guests coming up, and I have some dates to give you as well. David Skal, author of Something in the Blood, the untold story of Bram Stoker, the man who wrote Dracula, will be on the show for chapter 16 on August 23rd. August 23rd, David Skal is going to be here for chapter 16. And I've already announced this, but the date for it is Kim Newman, the fabulous Kim Newman, author of Anno Dracula, a lot of people's favorite, which he kind of diverges from Stoker's text at one point and then writes his own novel as if Dracula did succeed and take over the world. And that story was not told by Bram Stoker, but it's told in this book. And Kim is going to join us on September 27th, and he's going to join us for chapter 21, because that is the chapter from which Anno Dracula diverges from Stoker's book. And I'm very excited to announce that we will have our first knight on the show. One of my favorite scholars, authors, TV presenters, Sir Christopher Frayling, will be the special guest for the very last chapter of the novel on November 8th, which is also Bram Stoker's birthday. If you don't know Christopher Frayling, you should get his books and read them. He writes all kinds of things on not just vampires, but other pop culture topics, on film. He's got a great spaghetti Western book out that's really excellent. And it was Frayling as a scholar who kind of kicks off the serious literary study of Dracula and vampires. And he did it with a book called Vampires from Lord Byron to Count Dracula, is what it was. And it came out in the 1970s. And it was the book that really started, because Dracula had barely been taught in colleges as literature. And this book kind of said, no, you really need to take a serious look at vampire literature. He updated it very recently, just a couple years ago. And it's Vampires, Genesis and Resurrection from Count Dracula to Vampirella. And he means the Vampirella of the author.
Angela Carter.
Angela Carter's
Yeah.
Vampirella, not the Vampirella of the Jim Warren comics and comic books, but Angela Carter's Vampirella, who was a very good friend of Christopher Frayling as well. And he has an excellent book of essays out, Frayling does, and two of them, I think, are on Angela Carter and her oeuvre and how he knew her and the works that she created. So Christopher Franning will be here for the last chapter. That's going to be really exciting. I'm really happy about that. I'm still waiting on a chapter from Mark Gatiss. As soon as I have the date, I will let you know, but Mark Gatiss will be on the show as well. And do we have any questions to answer right away? No, we do not. So on with the show. Josh, let's talk about chapter 11 of Dracula. This is the fastest I've ever gotten to the chapter. It's 15 minutes into the show. So, and we have a lot today. I was really afraid we might go long today, but as we're hitting it right away, I think we might be pretty good. So I have a couple rabbit holes I need to go down.
Oh, I know, right?
And yeah, so especially with the drink, you know, I really was sold on I needed a Berserker drink, you know, for the wolf, but Renfield hasn't had a drink yet, and I figured even though he's only in a little bit of this chapter, one little paragraph, it's so key. The blood is the life, so that's really why I wanted to have the drink for Renfield today. We left the last chapter with the unshed tears of Seward over his reluctance to tell Van Helsing not to be overconfident. I was once overconfident that Lucy was going to be okay, and look what happened. It was a disaster. So that's where we left last time. And we start this with Lucy Westenra's diary, which is very nice. Mm-hmm. Josh, I was hoping you could read that little paragraph from Lucy Westenra's diary.
Yes. Lucy Westenra's diary, 12th September. How good they all are to me. I quite love that dear Dr. Van Helsing. I wonder why he was so anxious about these flowers. He positively frightened me. He was so fierce. And yet he must have been right, for I feel comfort from them already. Somehow I do not dread being alone tonight, and I can go to sleep without fear. I shall not mind any flapping outside the window. Oh, the terrible struggle that I have had against sleep so often of late, the pain of sleeplessness, or the pain of the fear of sleep with such unknown horrors as it has for me. How blessed are some people whose lives have no fears, no dreads, to whom sleep is a blessing that comes nightly and brings nothing but sweet dreams. Well, here I am tonight, hoping for sleep, and lying like Ophelia in the play with virgin krantz and maiden struments. I never liked garlic before, but tonight it is delightful. There is peace in its smell. I feel sleep coming already. Good night, everybody.
Well done, good job. He should have made her a cocktail, the Van Helsing drink last week with the garlic in it for her. That would have helped as well, as I learned. Well, Van Helsing is feeling confident because, and Lucy has caught on to that he's set up her room for safety with garlic. That's the only line of defense going on here. And we will learn, you know, that I think that it's probably not going to be the only thing that can help. I love that moment in it too. Early on, he positively frightened me. He was so fierce. Mm-hmm. I talked about that last week about how Van Helsing frightened her, and there's several moments in here, little tiny details in which Van Helsing is a lot like Dracula,
Yeah.
that if you read a line here and there from Van Helsing or about Van Helsing and told somebody who does this, who hadn't read the book, and even I've done it with students, and they can't always pick them. So there are a lot of similarities between those two characters. When you played this, Josh, when you did all the characters, did you kind of feel that in a sense that those two were two sides of the same coin or something like that?
Oh, very much so. And I'm glad you asked. That was something I definitely wanted to talk about a bit. Because I think you're absolutely right that Van Helsing and Dracula are shadows of each other, which is one of the reasons why I like the Transylvanian Clockworks play, because it really plays into that idea. But in my solo version of Dracula that I do, Van Helsing's voice is is like a lighter version of the voice I do for Dracula, you know, because the Dracula voice I do is very low with that dialect, and Von Helsing's is really almost the same dialect, but just higher and a little more whimsical at times. Like there's a lot of funny in Von Helsing, but there's also a sense that there's this darkness in him that you never quite get to know who he really is inside, which I think is fascinating and is a big part of what's in this chapter and going forward too.
They only cross paths the one time in the play later, right, in the house, and until the very end, and even then, Van Helsing's nowhere near them when they kill him, and so in a sense, you probably could do an adaptation where the same character plays them both. I mean, it would be a brawl, but you know, but you could double up that character as long as you take out that one scene where they come across each other, which wouldn't be that hard to do. But back to Lucy, he's been fierce, but he's comforted her, and finally, I do not dread being alone tonight. I can go to sleep without fear. And just imagine what that's been like for her for weeks now, to be afraid every night. I mean, the anxiety, the ongoing anxiety that produces over and over again, the fear of sleep. And I don't know how many nights it's been now since he's fed on her. I should do that. I should figure that out. Maybe somebody in the chat, how many times does Dracula feed on Lucy? I'm sure somebody knows, and then I won't have to go flipping through the book. And I'll put it in the Q&A so I know what that is. I'm sure somebody knows. But then again, her making this fear real, the flapping outside the window, which is Dracula as a bat, the terrible struggle I've had against sleep, the pain of the sleeplessness, and the pain of the fear of sleep, and unknown horrors. I mean, these are the words that she's using. Terrible struggle, pain, unknown horrors. But honestly, Lucy, I'm not so sure you should be comparing yourself to Ophelia sleeping, because that's not a sleep that Ophelia is going through at that moment in the play that she's described. I think that's the reverend at the priest at the side of the grave that says those words about her, isn't it? So that's about.
No, actually, it's
or is that
Gertrude when she's
Gertrude describing
telling like how she died.
Yeah.
So yeah, I think that's really interesting. That Lucy is already comparing herself to Ophelia when dead, yeah. And you get it's another, Hamlet reference for Henry Irving.
Yes, or it should be like, hey, Henry, do this play, do this book.
Oh no, yeah, totally.
So yeah, Ellen Terry make a great Lucy. So she's not, she's still with the company then, right? 97, I think she is.
No, yeah.
But she's, and hey, Van Helsing's plan is working so far. It's treating the patient, but also, and in treating her, it is a matter of ridding her of all this anxiety and fear that she has. So this is working so far. Let's see what happens. Now we have from Seward's diary, this is the next day. So this is her the night before, and this is the next day. So and the dates here are odd. Now we do seem to have a lost day here somewhere, because when they leave and the time that it takes Van Helsing to go back to Amsterdam and then return, these dates don't quite jive up. This should be like, Lucy should probably be the 11th, this should be the 12th, and those kind of things. But what we get here is, but it doesn't matter in a sense, because what we'll wind up with is there is a period of days a little later that there are no attacks. There's like a break of a few days with no attacks. So Lucy, so this is working right now is what it is. The note, and it's interesting because the notes though, in Stoker's notes, he has nothing, he has that calendar. He has nothing written for September 11th. He does have this written for the 12th. He does have them there treating her and leaving on the 10th or the 11th or the 10th. And then he has the 11th blank. So I think it's a matter of he was looking at his notes or his calendar and realized, yes, there's nothing on this day, but actually he needed to shift them all a day, with the plot. But it'll work out in the end. And that's not a rabbit hole. That's just like a little detail. There will be a rabbit hole coming soon. So, but he starts it. He has I called it the Berkeley Van Helsing as usual. We're going to go see Lucy. Let it all be put down exactly. So, it's a little reminder too that I'm recording this diary entry later after this has already happened. So, and a little down there, I was, and then they arrive at the house at Hillingham for Lucy, and they find out from her mother, oh my God, well, I was anxious about the dear child in the night and went into her room. She was sleeping soundly, so soundly that even my coming did not wake her. But the room was awfully stuffy. There were a lot of those horrible, strong-smelling flowers about everywhere, and she actually had a bunch of them round her neck. I feared that the heavy odor would be too much for the dear child in her weak state, so I took them all away and opened a bit of the window to let in the fresh air. You will be pleased with her, I am sure. So we all know what happened, that's, doom. And here is, and right away, we understand why Seward was, being ominous there. Let it all be put down exactly, because it's disaster right off the bat. And the smugness of Lucy's mother, that she knows better how to take care of her daughter because she's her mother. You understand on the one hand, on the other hand, it's like, could you not interfere with the doctor? And Van Helsing first actually smiles on her as he holds the door open and let her pass into her room. And then, why don't you read that paragraph there, Josh?
Great. All right.
Then for the first time.
Yeah. Then, for the first time in my life, I saw Van Helsing break down. He raised his hands over his head in a sort of mute despair, and then beat his palms together in a helpless way. Finally, he sat down on a chair, and putting his hands before his face, began to sob, with loud, dry sobs that seemed to come from the very racking of his heart. Then he raised his arms again, as though appealing to the whole universe. God, 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 he said, what have we done? What has this poor thing done that we are so sore beset? Is there fate amongst us still, sent down from the pagan world of old, that such things must be, and in such a way? This poor mother, all unknowing, and all for the best, as she think, does such thing as lose her daughter, body and soul, and we must not tell her, we must not even warn her, or she die, and then both die. Oh, how we are beset, how are all the powers of the devils against us? Suddenly he jumped to his feet. Come, he said, come, we must see and act. Devils or no devils, or all the devils at once, it matters not. We fight him all the same.
Good stuff. And that is key, right? Van Helsing having a breakdown. What do you think of that one?
No, I think that's such an interesting moment for several reasons. To have Seward say that, this is the first time I ever saw Van Helsing completely lose it. And I think it shows how emotionally invested Van Helsing has become in this whole thing, that it's not just a medical thing anymore. It's not just about the science of it and the superstition of it. It's become personal for him. And I love that it brings in that idea that I think recurs throughout the whole book of, like, there's the old world, what he calls the pagan world, in entering into this modern scientific world where these things aren't supposed to exist, but over and over again, they get told, no, this exists, like this, and this is a thing that you might not understand, but it exists. And that moment of Van Helsing having that breakdown and processing that and saying, it doesn't matter. We have to fight. It's our duty to fight. I think that's, yeah.
Yeah, and it's a prayer too, right? I mean, it's this prayer of despair, and even as he's talking to God, he's even wondering, well, am I, in a sense, praying to the old gods, the pagan world of old, that he can't quite come to grips with all of this. He's far more forgiving of Lucy's mom than I would be. Now, and I completely understand that, she wants to do something for her daughter, because she's kind of kept out of the picture always. And the excuse they always give, and it's all the men deciding this, like they know what's best for her. They know what's best for her mother, that she's not allowed to know this information. It's interesting that they never want to shock her with information, but because they keep all this stuff secret, the longer you keep something secret, the bigger a shock it's going to be. Then maybe you should feed a little information here and there. But anyway, or at least tell her to leave the garlic alone. That was your only job, Van Helsing, is to protect the place with garlic, and you left open a loophole for it.
And I think, from what you all talked about last week, I think is so true that that's another big theme in this book, of that withholding the truth always leads to harm. And that's why I feel such sympathy for Mrs. Westenra, because she's a great example of that. She's an example of this old Victorian, early Victorian world. And she's so delicate that she can't be told of these things. And all she wants to do is help her daughter. And she doesn't understand what's happening, and they don't tell her what it is, and which makes it worse.
Yes. Also a very histrionic breakdown from him, he's, and and it's not me, right? It's like he's a character in a play, all the steps that he goes through, hands over his head in mute despair, beat his palms together, sits down, hands on his face, the loud dry sobs. I mean, it's almost like stage directions. This is how you play the ultimate despair on stage.
Yeah.
But that must also be true, especially for that time, with these enormous theaters that they're playing to, with no audio help whatsoever. That you've got to play up emotions in order to have that register in the back, right? Do you see that kind of thing as an actor when you read this text? Do you see that theatricality in here that I think that Stoker has naturally from his job?
Oh yeah, I mean, that's a big part of the reason why I wanted to do and perform an adaptation of it, because Stoker was such a creature of the theater, and I think that is all through this book, and especially when you get these big speeches or monologues like you did with Dracula earlier, and Van Helsing here, and just the scale of it is huge. I love, he raised his arms again as though appealing to the whole universe. It's not just appealing to God, even though that's what he says immediately after, but like you said, the sort of stage direction of the writing is the whole universe, the size of that. That's a great note to give to an actor. I've probably given that note to an actor as the director before. But I think, that's all through it, that extremity of emotion.
And then even that next paragraph, that next little paragraph, he wore a look of stern sadness and infinite pity, as if this is the look that I'm giving now, and it's genuine. I mean, I think that he doesn't mean that in a way that Van Helsing is being disingenuous, but that's the language that's in Stoker's head, as if this is the stern sadness and infinite pity mask that you put on to play stern sadness and infinite pity. So, all right. And then, of course, we get the third hiss. Lee mentioned in the chat last week that, remember that it's because I was comparing it to a snake, and Lee was like, well, his is an inspiration. He's inhaling and making the hiss. It's still a hiss, okay? A hiss is a hiss is a hiss. He's making a hiss sound that Seward keeps calling our attention to, and for me, that's a little kind of bestial in a sense. But we have And again, did you watch? If you watched last week, I made the comment that, if I asked who hisses in the book, it would seem like that's something a vampire is doing, and it's actually Van Helsing.
Which is another connection. Yeah.
Yeah. And of course, yet another operation of transfusion of blood. Thank God they all have the same blood type. And we will have another transfusion. This time, it's Van Helsing's turn to give blood to Lucy. He is the lucky one. He won't get jealous he won't be jealous as Seward was last week. But Van Helsing gives the transfusion, and she's completely okay afterwards. After another hour, Lucy waked from her sleep fresh and bright and seemingly not much the worse for her terrible ordeal. What does it all mean? I am beginning to wonder if my long habit of life amongst the insane is beginning to tell upon my own brain. So Seward can't figure this out, what's going on here. And it is, but it's, well, for me, I think it's an instance of these men give her their blood, their healthy, virile, masculine blood, and it cures her momentarily each time. It cures her. But that's an interesting detail of the process of being preyed upon by a vampire and what will happen over the course of it. Now, and it begs the question for me, is Lucy okay? Is she never going to become a vampire now that does a transfusion save you? So we don't know, because Dracula keeps preying upon her, and then he'll prey upon her again, and finally, she will turn. Sorry, spoilers, but but it is interesting, and it is, my favorite. Is it my favorite? Yeah, I think my favorite American vampire movie is Near Dark. And I absolutely love it. Everything about it. It's a vampire clan. Okay. It's such a great take on vampires, and it's a great take on this kind of love relationship that you get in it. Adrian Pasdar's in it. He's a Philly kid. But the ending of Near Dark is like the worst ending of any vampire movie. And it's such a shame, because the way they have, and I'm just completely spoiling it, so tough. The way they finally turn her back from being a vampire is just giving her a transfusion. And it's because the dad of the boy she falls in love with, who she's turning into a vampire, is a veterinarian, so he can give, he understands how to give transfusions. He has some kind of medical expertise, albeit with animals. And she gets a transfusion and she's cured. And it seems like such a cheap way to save her at the end. That's it, just a transfusion. And I've always hated that. And now, and this is the first time I've ever really thought about it with Dracula, I'm thinking oh wait, maybe actually Stoker set that up. It's, maybe you can just be saved with a transfusion. I don't know. It's really unusual, because he doesn't give us the complete. I always talks about how we get the first real taxonomy of vampires here. That Stoker is even unwittingly, and I think it is unwittingly, defining how this creature is in folklore, listing all the strengths, listing all the weaknesses, and how you become a vampire. But I think it's unwitting, because he leaves so much out that I it's not his intention to do this, to create this vampire species and define it. It's just what happens in the book. And one of the questions is, what's happening with Lucy? How is she? Is it only feeding? I mean, I'm sure you've thought about these questions of dealing with this. Do you think Lucy fed on Dracula as Mina later does?
I mean, I think it's that's a very interesting question, because they never find any blood on her face or anything, or on her clothing, just the wounds, or little things that would lead you to assume that maybe that she hasn't fed on Dracula the way he makes Mina feed on him later, which I think is kind of super fascinating because it makes what he does to Mina even more impactful and perhaps special to him in a way. That's not, but again, like there's no evidence to say that he didn't do that with Lucy. You know, maybe cleaned her up afterward. Who knows? I don't know. Yeah, but it's an interesting thing to think about, like, and what that drinking from him means to him. I think is a fascinating thing.
Someone just put on chat, and I'm not sure if this is actually completely true, but that Lucy is AB positive, universal recipient. And does that work? Can you can your blood type accept all other blood types? You know, I'm asking. I think Locke's on here. Locke can answer that question. Yeah, so I wonder, and I never did look to see if anybody posted how many times Lucy was fed on, and I don't think we have that here. But anyway.
I also think it's interesting too, you know, with the whole idea of Van Helsing now being the one to give his own blood. Like, I think the evolution of that is kind of fascinating, because first it's people who, you know, have some connection to her, but he's an outsider, he's a stranger, but he now feel like I was saying earlier, this very personal emotional connection. Now he's giving his own blood, you know, when Dr. Seward before was talking about it in a very almost romanticized, sexualized way. So I think it's an interesting thing to track for Van Helsing's evolution into how he's dealing with this.
We're getting in the chat that there's more determining factors than blood type for a transfusion. So, you know, the answer wouldn't be that's not all she needs to have. But yeah, it's I'm sorry, as you were saying too, that, you know, it is, it's Van Helsing, and then it's his. I mean, we know he's invested. Now he's really invested. But also, what I was getting to with the blood transfusions is, what if they had given Mina one later on? Now,
and why didn't they?
Well, but because she wasn't in that drained condition, that like fed on her, obviously, he feeds on her, and then, you know, and then she drinks his blood, and then that's it. So I wonder if, you know, if they had even thought of that. But because she didn't look like she had lost so much blood, they didn't do it. So
yeah.
All righty. Let's back to now we get Lucy's diary again. Yeah, why don't you read this, Josh? Lucy Westenra's diary, 17 September.
4 days and nights of peace. I'm getting so strong again that I hardly know myself. It is as if I had passed through some long nightmare and had just awakened to see the beautiful sunshine and feel the fresh air of the morning around me. I have a dim half-remembrance of long, anxious times of waiting and fearing, darkness in which there was not even the pain of hope to make present distress more poignant, and then long spells of oblivion, and the rising back to life as a diver coming up through a great press of water. Since, however, Dr. Van Helsing has been with me, all this bad dreaming seems to have passed away. Oh, I lost my place. The noises that used to frighten me out of my wits, the flapping against the windows, the distant voices which seemed so close to me, the harsh sounds that came from I know not where and commanded me to do I know not what, have all ceased. I go to bed now without any fear of sleep. I do not even try to keep awake. I have grown quite fond of the garlic, and a boxful arrives for me every day from Haarlem. Tonight, Dr. Van Helsing is going away, as he has to be for a day in Amsterdam. But I need not be watched. I am well enough to be left alone. Thank God for Mother's sake, and dear Arthur's, and for all our friends who have been so kind. I shall not even feel the change, for last night Dr. Van Helsing slept in his chair a lot of the time. I found him asleep twice when I awoke, but I did not fear to go to sleep again, although the boughs or bats or something flapped almost angrily against the window panes.
Dum dum dum.
Dum dum dum.
Yeah, something's happening.
Mm.
Another really well written passage from Stoker too, and I love this, explaining her, getting better, the dim half remembrance of long anxious times of waiting and fearing, darkness in which there was not. I'm just like want to reading the whole sentence. Darkness of which was not even the pain of hope to make present distress more poignant, and then that long spells of oblivion and the rising back to life as a diver coming up through a great press of water. That's really gorgeous stuff, and it's really interesting way to describe, especially as we've already had Lucy's description of what it was like to be fed on, especially for the first time, and that kind of transcendent experience that she goes through, where she has this kind of out-of-body experience, and now coming back to life is like the experience of coming up, like rising up as a diver through this great press of water. Lucy's pretty smart, and Lucy's really in tune with how she feels, and that's a nice aspect of her that I think gets overlooked.
Yeah, I think Lucy as a character in general really gets overlooked for the journey she takes, which is one of the things I love about this chapter, but we'll get to that.
Yeah. But Dracula, and she's 4 nights. She gets 4 free nights. Maybe it was 3 if we messed up a date. That doesn't matter. What the point is she's had a break here, and Dracula can't get in. The garlic works, is what we're finding out here. And does this, because he tries to visit, she hears the flapping against the window, and he can't, and he couldn't get in. Or wait, is it tonight he's gone away, I do not fear to go to sleep again, but it's batting against the window, the flapping against the window is distant voices, like, is he, it doesn't exactly say that he was trying to get in these nights, but apparently, I think what Stoker's trying to tell us is that the garlic will work if we leave it there. So he can't even come in with the garlic. That's what we're saying here, that he can't command her to open up the window so he could come in. We haven't actually, it seems, well, I think why can't he enter is because the garlic is on the windows, and he doesn't seem to be able to have the power to have Lucy come and remove it, which would make sense that she is getting better, that she has had this transfusion of blood, and he can't command her to do this now, as he could command her maybe in the past when he had been repeatedly feeding on her. But does this mean, here's the question I have. Does he always just feed on her at the window as a bat, as he did in Whitby? Now we're in London and Hillingham. Does he just feed on the window as a bat? Or is he able to come in? And has she invited him in, and that's why he can come in? Or has he found a way in another way, which I can get to in a minute? Because it's not likely he only feeds on her at the window, because when he feeds on her, she's so drained that it doesn't seem likely that she'd be able to go back to bed afterwards. So he must be coming in and feeding on her in her bed. So I think we can assume Dracula can enter her room, meaning someone is invited him into the house. My money's not actually on Lucy. My money's on the maids. Because that passage, this is a rabbit hole. Here's a rabbit hole I'm going down. Because the passage from the last chapter, which is so conspicuous in the way Stoker has placed it and worded it. In the hall, 2 of the maids came to me, there's a Seward, and asked if they or either of them might not sit up with Miss Lucy. They implored me to let them, and when I said it was Dr. Van Helsing's wish that either he or I should sit up, they asked me quite piteously to intercede with the foreign gentlemen, in quotation marks. I was much touched by their kindness. Perhaps it is because I'm weak at present, and perhaps because it was on Lucy's account, and that their devotion was manifested for over and over again. Have I seen similar instances of women's kindness? I think it's Stoker trying to throw. Here's a character, Stoker trying to throw us off the scent a little bit, but also it seems such a conspicuous paragraph. The foreign gentleman in quotation marks. Do they really mean Dracula? Have they confused the two? And just the way they quite piteously try to intercede as if they are under some kind of control. Now, there are problems with this later that we'll find out. The Klinger mentions, in Les Klinger's annotated, he mentions Clive Leatherdale's suggestion that it was Lucy's mother under the command of Dracula who removed the garlic. But Stoker never gives us any hint of this. And I do see this hint from the maids, and I also see multiple examples in this book where Stoker has something happen but doesn't spell it out for us, never spells it out for us. He lets us figure it out. And what do you think, Judd? Is he coming into the house, and is it the maids?
Yeah, no, I definitely agree with that interpretation, that sort of backstage behind the scenes of what the people who are currently reporting to us in the book know, that Dracula has infiltrated the house through the maids in some way, that I think he's probably controlling them in similar ways that he controls Renfield, cause I don't think it's an accident that you see that in a lot of film adaptations, like going back to 1931, the Bela Lugosi version. He gets in through one of the maids, and as the maid opened the window, they didn't pull that out of thin air. I think that's definitely implied here in the book. And yeah, I don't think it's Mrs. Westenra. I really think, with how Stoker as a writer treats her as a character, I think she's meant to be just a pure good character. Yeah, I don't think it's her.
And we'll have more on the maids in a bit in the end of this chapter, which complicates things. So if he's been invited in, and it's probably the maids, he has access to her. We know that he has to be invited in. Or maybe we don't know yet. I think that's what we find out later, that Van Helsing tells people. But I know this now, that Dracula has to be invited in, and maybe so that he hasn't been able to get in. It's two things, I think. It's the garlic, and it was Van Helsing's presence in the room, sitting up with her for a few nights, that is keeping Dracula away. And the flapping is him getting up close and seeing Van Helsing in the room, smelling, sensing the garlic. And then this night, obviously, well, something else will happen, that he's unable to get past the garlic. Dracula comes up with a plan, and it works. So that's where we are now. Before, any further on that? Because I want to.
No, nothing further on this at the moment.
Before we get to the Escaped Wolf newspaper account, this is when we'll take our mid-break. And on this mid-break, what I will do is let you know one of the other fabulous things that we're doing associated with Sundays with Dracula. I will be hosting a monthly book discussion course called Read the Blood of Dracula. And it is, let me share the screen with you, that you can go on our website and register for this. If you go on our website here, if you go on the programs, you can hit virtual courses. This is where you can go and find the Hogwarts at Home, the Learning Ulysses Online. There's an African-American detective fiction course that starts in early August. I can't wait for that. And here it is, Read the Blood of Dracula. This course will begin on Tuesday, August 18th. Is that when it starts? I have my list here. It is, what it is an ongoing monthly seminar. It's on a Tuesday evening. It's 25 hours per session. you can sign up for just one of them, the ones that interest you in this series, or you can sign up for all 5 that we have scheduled at once through December. Unlike this Sundays with Dracula series that you're watching now, these meetings will include your discussion. We're going to use the Zoom meeting format, so we're all on the screen at the same time, just like a class. It's how we run the virtual courses at the Rosenbach. Class size will be limited to just 25 people per session. So, and right now for the next week, only Rosenbach members can sign up for these course meetings. Next week, it will be open to the general public. And so if you're not a member, then you have to wait until next week to register. It is one of the benefits that we like to provide our members, that they get first crack at programs and courses. So, but it is, we're going to do the first class on Dracula itself. So we'll have a 2-hour discussion of all of Dracula, whatever themes in it you want to talk about. For me, and the way I always taught Dracula back when I used to teach college and when I used to do vampire literature classes, is Bram Stoker's Dracula has become the text of vampire fiction and lore. So it's the vampire story that not only continues to influence all vampire, like it's nearly impossible to write a vampire story now and not have it reflect on Dracula in some way, but also it influences the way we read all the vampire stories that came before it. Back to folklore. Not only did Stoker mine folklore and previous vampire fiction for his Dracula, but it's just, we still see Dracula in all this stuff. So I always do this. I always start with Dracula, and then we go back and start from the beginning and go forward. So the first meeting is on Stoker's Dracula on August 18th, and then we'll be going back to the beginning with some vampire folklore in September. On September 15th, we'll do vampire folklore. October, we'll do Byron's Fragment and Polidori's Vampire. In November, we'll do The Mysterious Stranger, which is a really great vampire story that very much influenced Stoker's Dracula. And then we'll do, Josh, your favorite, Carmilla in December. So, and let me just invite you, Josh, if you want to come in December, I would love to have you along with it too. That'd be really nice.
I would love that. Yeah.
So that'd be a great discussion group on Carmilla in December. I would like to do more of these, and if this is successful, I will. I will continue this Read the Blood of Dracula course indefinitely. I want to do I Am Legend. I want to do Martin's Fever Dream. I want to do Anno Dracula. I want to do The Historian by Elizabeth Kostova, especially because the last chapter is at the Rosenbach in that novel. I want to do Varney the Vampire, or at least get people to read pieces of Varney the Vampire. I can never get people to read the whole thing. So read the Blood of Dracula. If you're a Rosenbach member, you can register right now, and it will. And if you're not a member, next week registration will open to the general public. I hope you'll do this with me. It'll be a lot of fun. It's a way that we get to do even more vampire literature things. And I'll be totally honest, I tried to keep the price low, $25 a session. Generally, a Rosenbach course is $50 per session for, calculated for the whole course. And I wanted to keep these prices lower. I really hope that more people can do it because of that, and hope it fills up, because I want to keep doing it and do all this stuff and talk about vampires and Dracula and so much fun. So Read the Blood of Dracula. I hope you'll register. That's our mid-break. Let's get back to the novel. And we have another newspaper, the second newspaper account we've had in the book. And this is from the Pall Mall Gazette, 18 December. The Escaped Wolf, Perilous Adventure of Our Interview with the Keeper in the Zoological Gardens, Thomas Bilder. There was a funny comment, and it totally sold me that I can see this now, that Lucina Tucker mentioned that the voice he hears for Bilder and his wife are Michael Palin and Terry Jones from Monty Python. Like that's how and I completely buy that. Yeah. But it also, I think, registers as or makes the point that, which is true, that it's a comic scene, and Stoker, has a little comic scene in here, and he's taking his time setting this scene. It's like time for a story, everyone. And I'm going to have this newspaper reporter come in and tell this story. about the the zookeeper. I don't remember if you had. Do you have a Thomas Builder voice?
I don't. And this whole section was one of my great sorrows in adapting this into a one person show, is that there is so much about the arc of Lucy, this whole section of the book, that I love so much. Like this is one of my favorite chapters anyway. But yeah, I just couldn't fit it in. Which is why I'm glad I'm here today, because I really love it here.
Because it is as a kind of extra story, it is the kind of thing that, when you're trying to streamline, you're trying to really create this, cohesive story. It is extra. It is, and this is very much in that 19th century style of, it's not like an extra story that's not connected to the plot. It's still connected to the plot, but Stoker does get to use those conventions where people like to have, and it's actually a little earlier than this novel in the 19th century novels, where someone comes on and tells a story. So he's found a way to marry that thing that happens in Dickens novels frequently, where somebody come in and I'm going to tell you a story, and I'll tell you a story. It's got nothing to do with the plot, any of the characters. I'm just telling you a story. Maybe it thematically links, but Stoker's been able to do that and yet still have it seriously connect, because it's very important what goes on in this as to what will happen later in the next chapter. So it's what do you want to read some of it? Is there a part you want to read, or should we just well, let's just set it up a little. It's the keeper of the reporter visits Thomas Builder and his wife in this little cottage in an enclosure behind the elephant house, and the keeper would not enter on what he called business until the supper was over and we were all satisfied. Then when the table was cleared, and he had lit his pipe, so all right, I love a pipe smoker in a book. And then he starts talking, and I'm just trying to, like, at what point, I mean, the whole thing is fun, but
I mean, yeah, and it's fascinating. I'm glad you brought up like that it's like Dickens, because that's how I feel about this whole thing too, that, in the middle of this book, it drops in these characters that are like pure, like East End, like with especially the way it's written, like written in dialect, this thick dialect, which he's using to denote class.
I don't mean to put you on the spot. Do you want to try some of this dialect?
Oh Christ!
You don't have to.
No, yeah, I will. But I think it's interesting. Before I do, I think it's interesting too that when, like, in a little bit, when the keeper goes into like what actually happened with the wolf in the text of the book, the dialect gets a lot less, because I think Stoker's like, all right, this is really important information, so I'm not going to make it as hard for people to read.
Yeah.
Which I think is fun.
Well, he says something interesting in here, and I had a question that came in by email, like this morning or last night, I'm not sure when, from Anastasia, and it really kind of ties in here, and I think it's fascinating. So I definitely want to make sure we get this first big paragraph from Builder, and just to mention that in it, he talks about feeding the animals that he does, and he says, mind you, he added philosophically, there's a deal of the same nature in us as in them their animals. Here's you a coming and arsking of me questions about my business, and I that grumpy like that only for your bloomin' arf quid I see you. All right, that's not the part, but it's that there's a deal of the same nature in us as in them their animals. I had a question from Anastasia that she wanted me to address, and it's and actually she said she has to pop off at 3, so she's going to watch this on replay. I think she's not watching it right now. The emphasis this chapter seems to place on the similarity between man and animal. She writes, this is something you've touched on in earlier shows, but it seems to be really at the forefront in this chapter. The zookeeper talking about how there's a deal of the same nature in us as in them their animals, and his wife suggesting that he spent so long among the animals that he's like one himself. I'm especially thinking about the blurriness of the man-animal boundary in the context of evolution. Origin of Species is 1869. and especially H.G. Wells's Island of Dr. Moreau, which he writes is only the previous year, 1896. And Wells was a student of Darwin's proponent Huxley. Looking forward to hearing what you have to say. Yes. And this is a great moment in there where we get this, because Dracula himself is a human animal, can transform into animals. He is technically also a werewolf. This, what do you think on that, about this, Josh? Does this happen more than just now in the novel?
I mean, I think it's a really important theme that runs through it, you know, and I think the idea of, like, specifically men being equated with animals, or their animal nature, that sort of that primitive violence that can happen, I think does run through the whole book, along with that whole idea of the old world versus the new, the modern, you know, because I think the things that the male characters do and experience, like, there is a thread of this book that has always interested me greatly, especially in my own telling of it, that one of the major themes of it is this sort of idea of sexual violence, you know, and that intrusion, you know, all these different men giving their blood, their bodily fluids to Lucy, you know, the things that happen with Dracula and Mina later on, things that happen with Dracula and the sisters and Jonathan Harker. I think that's a really important thing that I feel is very, you know, very relevant still, but also a very Victorian thing too, you know, that it's this polite world, you know, empire in which the sun will never set, but there's this underneath to it that people try to hide that can't help but come out. So I think that's definitely something that's there and very important.
And that's something that's a topic, that's a theme that's frequently in werewolf stories, especially in the 19th and the 20th century. That idea of sexual violence inside coming out as some kind of beast. But I do really think that, yes, this idea of the anxiety over humanity and our connection with the animal world is that there is an absolute anxiety in the late 19th century, you know, Darwin and as evident, and H.G. Wells' Island of Dr. Moreau is one of the greats. It's whenever I did a monster lit class, that was always one of them. The text that we looked at, it is, and I see a lot of that in here, and I don't know how. I imagine that Stoker was also aware of Wells's works and likely read them. They were popular. He knows Wells later, I think. I'm not sure he knows Wells now, but it's likely that he read them. And not that he's mining them for ideas, but I think Stoker is dealing with the same anxieties that all monster books deal with, is they deal with the anxieties that are current in a culture at the time. And one of those anxieties is, well, from the Victorian perspective, well, if we've evolved from animals, we're still animals, and there's still animal in us. And then we know for certain that Stoker's influenced by Max Nordau's regeneration and degeneration, and that book gets mentioned in Dracula later, the idea that, well, if we've evolved, we can also devolve, and that's what you call criminals. Criminals are people who are devolved, and how bestial they are, and how they're described as being more animal-like. So I think there's a lot of that going on, and this is a perfect moment. And it didn't dawn on me in reading through this. I'm just so excited to get to Berserker the Wolf that I read past that without seeing it. So I'm glad Anastasia pointed that out, that there's a deal of the same nature in us as in them. They're animals. So that is something that comes up often in this book, and that is a main anxiety that people have. Here we're coming up with. Oh, let me shake my drink. I had to do this in mid-break and I forgot, so I needed another cocktail. Another Flyman, another Renfield special here. The but because now we get to that ear wolf, what we call Berserker. So, which is Berserker. And this is kind of a rabbit hole that I have here. Oh, you know, but we were talking about dialect, and I just didn't want to let this pass without mentioning it, that the dialect, and it's very Dickens-like as well, it's very Dickensian as well. But dialect is never just regional. Whenever, especially in Victorian books, when you see dialect,
yep,
it's class.
Yep.
That's a lot of what's going on here. That this is a class distinction being made between the journalist who can speak English without misspelling it into various ways, and that Builder is of another class, and it makes him humorous, and it also but it also puts him in his place. So the fact that Stoker puts that very interesting line about humans and animals together, I really like, because it's a moment where Stoker's not looking down on someone of a lower class, but saying they actually have something to teach us. And that's a really nice part about this, until later when, Builder goes and makes a misogynist joke, but anyway, but he mentions the wolf is named Berserker. He calls him Berserker, which, as many of you know, are Norse fighters. This is from the ancient Old Norse world in the 5th, 6th, 7th century. Those times where the Vikings, where they would go and these Norse fighters would go into a fury-like trance. Like, they're so crazy that they go in this fury, and this is how they would fight. Now, we still get the expression to go berserk over this. You go berserk, it means you just go crazy, and that's where this comes from, that these were fighters that were particularly named this. Now, there's the etymology of this is that it could be combining Bjorn, which means bear, with Serker, which is like a coat. And you can find lots of references to people then casting berserkers as some kind of shapeshifters, like the fact that they put on a bear skin or a wolf skin or whatever means that they were transforming into an animal. And then that would lead folklore to say that these people transformed. And then so for some people, it's kind of the origin stories of werewolves, and for some cultures. But Dracula even brings this up, right, to Jonathan at the castle. We Seekleys have a right to be proud, for in our veins flows the blood of many brave races who fought as the lion fights for lordship. Here in the whirlpool of European races, the Ugric tribe bore down from Iceland the fighting spirit which Thor and Woden gave them, which their berserkers displayed to such fell intent on the seaboards of Europe and of Asia and Africa too, till the peoples thought that the werewolves themselves had come. So Dracula himself tells us to Jonathan back at the castle when he's talking about berserkers and how it led people to think that they were actually werewolves attacking them. And then in retrospect, knowing Dracula turns into a wolf, you're kind of thinking like, oh, we probably were. They were vampires turning into wolves and attacking people in battle. But actually, it's not necessarily folklore in a sense. It's actually, Dracula's maybe hinting that actually did happen. And Stoker gets Berserker and this info about it that he used in that earlier chapter, and that he's named the wolf for here. Stoker gets it from reading Sabine Baron Gould's Book of Werewolves, which was published in 1865. And he took some notes from it, and we have them. They're part of Stoker's notes. And what he did is, it's a little 3x6 note card, and that he takes notes on both sides of that card from Sabine Baring Gould's book. And Sabine Baring Gould is the Reverend Sabine Baring Gould. He's best remembered for his hymn, Onward Christian Soldiers. He actually wrote that. He also wrote lots of books. He loved folklore. He would write a lot of folklore books. He wrote fiction. He even wrote a vampire story called Marjorie of Quethere, which was published in 1844 in Cornhill Magazine, and which is a really creepy vampire story. The guy's ringing the bell in the church, and some little baby-shaped being crawls up the rope, and it's all leathery, and it's an old vampire. And then she feeds on him and feeds people and gets, becomes, larger and more like a person again over the course of the story. There was even a review of Dracula which included a reference to, like, it's like Marjorie of Quithair. So, so I wonder if Stoker saw that review. I'm sure he saw that review. But Saving Baron Gould was also has got a great Sherlockian connection. He's the grandfather of William Baring Gould, who wrote a biography of Sherlock Holmes when that published? Maybe in the 50s, called Sherlock Holmes at Baker Street.
Yeah.
And then he later, William Baring Gould's, it's his annotated Sherlock Holmes, giant 2-volume annotated Sherlock Holmes, which was the standard until Les Klinger came out with his own. And it's William Baring Gould that most people, the Sherlockians who play the game of all the stories are real and have said, it's Baring Gould's chronology of the stories that most people adhere to, although you have arguments back and forth as to what story goes where in the timeline. But what's really interesting is in the biography of Sherlock Holmes that William Baring Gould wrote, he based several incidents in Sherlock Holmes's life on his grandfather, Saving Baring Gould. So, especially when he was young. So Sherlock Holmes is a lot like Saving Baring Gould because he was used for, inspiration for his grandson's biography of Sherlock. So that's some fun stuff. But anyway, so that's part of a rabbit hole. But the other rabbit hole is just going into this book of werewolf. Well, this isn't a rabbit hole because I'm going to share the notes with you, and this is I'll just share one of the pages here from that Stoker took on this, and it's here it is, and you can see it's the Book of Werewolves up top here. Book of Werewolves, Baring Gould, right here, and then he had right at the top, werewolf or berserker had period of exhaustion after berserker fury. And then he has page 45. This is the page number from the Baring Gould book, so that he could go back and find this reference. But he's reading it, writing little notes here for himself. It's funny that all the notes here, all the page numbers are right, except this one. It's actually not 45, it was 35. And I had trouble finding it. And then I thought maybe he had a different edition, but he didn't. He just wrote the wrong page number down because all the others match. I love this detail here. Werewolves met night of Nativity of Christ. And in Baring Gould's book, it is on Christmas night every year, the werewolves all have a meeting. I love that idea, but he doesn't bring that into Dracula. But he does have here mem, green taper with blue flame in Count's house, page 71, in which in Baring Gould's book, there's this described this scene where there's this ceremony and they're all holding green tapers and they have blue flames on them. Blue flames make it into the book, but not necessarily in this way. It's not a green taper holding a with a blue flame in the Count's house. He does bring the blue flames from another piece that he finds in Emily Gerard. Right here he has canine teeth protruding over lower lip when mouth closed. And he also has pointed nails, page 87. This is someone describing how you know a werewolf when they're not transformed. It's a little tip, hot tip Baring Gould somebody gives in this story for people to identify werewolves. And that's Dracula. That's what he looks like. He has taken details from werewolves and made them details for vampires. And this is part of the meshing of the two, folkloric creatures that Stoker does here. And I don't think there are any mention of vampires with canine teeth. Are there in fiction for this novel? And also there's biting on the neck and all, but nobody mentions the canines, I think, until Stoker, and also the pointed nails. And then there's another detail a little later here, which is practically right out of Stoker. He's almost taken this word for word. And that he writes here, werewolf has broad hands, short fingers, and has some hairs in the hollow of hand right here. So that's almost verbatim from earlier in the chapter when Jonathan first sees Dracula, about his hands being broad and the fingers squat and thick, and hairs in the hollow of the hand. So this is firsthand. This is exactly where Stoker's getting some of his material for vampires, and he gets it from this book of werewolves from Baring Gould, and of course Dracula is in a sense both creatures, right, Josh?
Oh yeah, very much that. Mm-hmm.
Let's unshare that and get back to the chapter. So I love that, and he gets Berserker from Baring Gould, and he brings that in. And Dracula is all about that. Berserker wearing a bear skin or a wolf skin. That's actually a different name. People that wear wolf skins, it's like a old something. I can't remember the term. But but what's really also likely is that the word Berserker could not be bear, the word for bear code, but it could probably mean bear, meaning bear without clothes or just without armor, and plus circle. So and what that would mean is that these warriors were rushing into battle with either no armor or naked. Like, they're so crazy that they're fighting naked. They're just coming in with a sword and a shield. And the text, and there's a little bit about this, and this isn't like completely crazy. There's, this is from the National Museum of Denmark. On their website, they have a bit about this. And today, to go berserk is synonymous with to run amok or be completely out of control. This makes sense, given that the word refers to a particular form of combat practiced in the Viking Age, in which the fighters threw off their chainmail and tunics and fought naked. Filled with rage and without fear for his own life, the berserker cast himself into the midst of the battle, arousing terror among fiends and foes alike. The word may also refer to the fact that the fighters had a bear's strength and wildness. But they seem, at the National Museum of Denmark, they seem to be good with this, because they have this horn. They have a horn here that has these images on it that I will share with you. And here's one of them, of berserkers in going into battle. And to make this a little bigger, he's got his shield and his sword here, and
nothing else.
And yeah, and like, look at the way they've made his belly here, with this little curve here that is, I'm naked and I'm coming and fighting you in battle. So this kind of thing would seem to confirm that this is, fighters going to battle naked. But the other image, which I think is really fascinating, is the other side of the horn has this image of this berserker here, and look at the horns. This is Marvel's Loki right here going into battle, naked, or maybe he's got like some skin tight superhero suit on, but I love these horns. And it also brings to mind too that, the horned helmet, I thought, was supposed to be a Viking myth invented in the 19th century, like for operas. They started using horn helmets. The movies adopted them. Vikings had horns on their helmets. Historians always say that we've actually never found a helmet with horns. We don't think Vikings had horned helmets. There's a horned helmet on a artistic representation of one on this gold horn right here. So perhaps they did, but I love the I love that Stoker was able to bring all of this into the book, not only with Dracula talking about it, he comes us back around to it again with the wolf being named Berserker, and in the Builder, Thomas Builder pronunciation of Berserker. And the use of this word does call to mind that warrior ethos that Dracula did, but also the how the blood of the Draculas, the Dracula as their heart's blood, their brains, their swords. Dracula's all about this. And just the idea, I think, of a zoo with wolves, wild animals, plunked down in a metropolis. This kind of thing must have really amused Dracula. Here he's coming to invade this country, and oh, look, they have wild animals right in the middle of their city. That must have been very amusing to him to then get to use, one of those wild animals. But I think in a way, also in a bigger picture, in a way that Stoker's not maybe aware of, it's that bestial presence. We have it again in the midst of a modern city is always there. I just overlooked the fact of a zoo. Of course, there's a zoo. Cities have zoos. That's no big deal. But the idea of that is really strange, isn't it? That there's we put this little piece of wild nature, not really wild, that we can go and look at. And zoos can be really problematic in the way, we treat animals. Not everybody loves them. But that presence in the middle of the city is really quite odd.
Well, and I think too, like, that's one of the things that's interesting here, that idea of that, perhaps from Dracula's point of view, like, oh, you're trying to cage the animal because you think you can do that, and I'll show you how that's impossible, how easy it is to let the animal out,
There's even a note in one of Stoker's notes. He has at zoo, rage of lion, and then eagle. And then Dracula earlier in that speech, remember, he says, we fought as the lion fights. And so I wonder if at first he did want to use a lion and then thought about it and thought, well, I don't know, an escaped lion might seem a little ridiculous and maybe not believable. But the wolf, obviously, really, is, because Dracula's a wolf himself. We've already proven he can do wolves. So he moves to the wolves. But it seems as if he was thinking about or an eagle would have been amazing, huh? Dracula's eagle busting through Lucy's window. I would have liked that. But he went with the wolf, and that is what we have. So that's my Berserker rabbit hole that I had to go down. It is always appropriate for anyone who works for the Rosenbach to go down a rabbit hole, because that very metaphor comes from Alice going down the rabbit hole, and the Rosenbach has one of the greatest Lewis Carroll collections in the world. We have all kinds of Alice letters and books and drawings. So my life is about going down the rabbit hole. So sometimes with collections. Back to the chapter, we meet Dracula. Builder tells the story. Do you want to do that? Well, sir, it was about 2 hours. And do that whole scene where Builder meets Dracula.
Yeah, and I love this section because I feel like this is kind of a forgotten section by most people. Because I think most people think, oh, after the castle, you don't see Dracula again until Mina and Harker meet him later. But like, this is so interesting because it's one of the few times, maybe the only time, I think, where someone who's completely outside of this story that we're being told speaks with Dracula, like it's from a completely different source.
Because we don't get it with anyone else. So we only get a description of anyone having a conversation with him, except here.
Yeah, and I think someone put in one of the questions or in the chat earlier that this article is not attributed to being in anyone's journal or diary or anything. It's kind of outside. It seems kind of outside of things, which I also think is fascinating.
Yeah, Adam noted that it's it's the article from the Demeter was cut and pasted into Mina's journal, and this one is just there.
Mm-hmm.
But which reminds us of the fact that there's an editor. An editor has put
Yeah.
the collection together, whether it could even be one of the Vampire Hunter crew here, but someone put everything in its place to tell this story.
Mm-hmm. All right. Well, sir, it was about 2 hours after feeding yesterday when I first hear my disturbance. I was making up a litter in the monkey house for a young puma which is ill, but when I heard the yelping and owling, I kept away straight. I came away straight. There was Berserker a tearing like a mad thing at the bars as if he wanted to get out. There wasn't much people about that day, and close at hand was only one man, a tall, thin chap with a hook nose and a pointed beard. There's the nose again, as we talked about. Pointed beard with a few white hairs running through it. He had a hard, cold-looking red eyes, and I took a sort of mislike to him, for it seemed as if it was him as they was irritated at. He had white kid gloves on his hands, and he pointed out the animals to me and says, "Keeper, these wolves seem upset at something." "Maybe it's you," says I, for I did not like the airs as he gave himself. He didn't get angry, as I hoped he would, but he smiled a kind of insolent smile with a mouth full of white, sharp teeth. "Oh no, they wouldn't like me," he says. "Oh yes, they would," says I, and imitating of him. "They always like a bone or two to clean their teeth on about tea time, which you has a bag full." Well, it was an odd thing, but when the animals seen us talking, they lay down. And when I went over to Berserker, he let me stroke his ear, same as ever. Then their man come over, and blessed but if he didn't put his hand and stroke the old wolf's ears too. "Take care," says I, "Berserker is quick." "Never mind," he says. "I'm used to him." "Are you in the business yourself?" I says, taking off at that. "For a man what trades in wolves, and cetera, is a good friend to keepers." "No," says he. "Not exactly in the business, but I have made pets of several." And with that, he lifts his hat as polite as a lord and walks away. Should I stop there?
That next sentence, that's it.
Okay, good. Walks away. Old Berserker kept a looking after him till he was out of sight, and then went down and lay in a corner and wouldn't come out till all evening. Well, last night, so soon as the moon was up, the wolves here all began a howling. There weren't nothing for him to howl at. There weren't no one near, except someone that was evidently a calling a dog somewheres out back of the gardens in the park road. Once or twice I went out to see that all was right, and it was, and then the howling stopped. Just before 12 o'clock, I just took a look around before turning in, and bust me. But when I came opposite to old Berserker's cage, I see the rails broken and twisted about, and the cage empty. And that's all I know for certain.
Good. What a great scene. And I love that Builder Z's giving Dracula the business.
Yeah.
He has no fear of him. All he is you're strange looking and creepy, but
foreign looking.
Yeah, but I'm not afraid of you. I keep the wolves here in the zoo, and he just. I love how not only does he have an encounter with Dracula, but he insults him. And he goes away free. Poor old Mr. Swales just sits on the wrong bench and gets killed. And here Builder is just, and it is odd that Dracula doesn't kill him. Because that's the way he acts towards people. He has no care for you whatsoever.
Yeah, and I think there's something interesting about that too, and that like the way that, at least as reported here, like Dracula responds to him, that it's very calm and assured, and he has a great command of the English language. Like the way he speaks is different than how he speaks with Jonathan, and like there's almost that sense of he's getting very comfortable in this new world and feeling like all that he can do. So maybe I wonder if that's why he spares him, because he's enjoying.
Well, I think he's not intimidated. Like he doesn't, Builder doesn't intimidate Dracula. He's just a zookeeper, so no one's a threat to Dracula. when they all will trap him later in the one house, he laughs at them and just leaves.
Yeah.
He is. Well, at the same time, I think if one of his, Romany, workers back at Castle Dracula had said anything like this, he just would have cut his head off. He just would have ripped his head off, and that would have been the end of him. In that land, he is the Lord, and these people, do what they want for him. But it's part of Dracula recognizing that I'm in a new land, and sometimes the lower classes get uppity with you, and it doesn't matter to me because I'm Dracula, and I can do whatever I want. And he has a plan. He wants to get the wolf. Obviously, if he kills him there, that hurts him for getting the wolf later. But I just love it. A builder, giving him the business, calling him, you've got a bag of bones you could, they can pick your teeth with, and it's just really fun. So the wolf is gone. He finds the cage, is the bars broken out. Is that where you just read, or is that later? I'm sorry.
Yeah.
And one of the other gardeners saw a big gray dog coming out through the gardening edges. And that would have been Berserker, or maybe that was Dracula, but it's a gray dog, so I think it's probably Berserker. So Dracula just called. Well, he says that he hears someone calling a dog somewhere, and that's obviously Dracula is calling him. But I guess Dracula also breaks the bars out, so it's not like he's calling him from far off, but Dracula must have gone up and broken the bars out and then walked off and then called him, and then the wolf leaves. Why did the wolf leave? That wolf escaped simply because he wanted to get out. And then they crack up, he and his wife. They have this little joke with the journalist. But it's interesting. That is, but it's, it's this funny joke about, well, it's Builder thinking it's a funny joke. But it's also, this is, a caged animal does want to get out. They're in cages. But it also makes me think too, this idea of this, because what we're talking about animals and humans, and we have the same nature, and how it comes out of us, and the idea of wildness in us trying to get out, that maybe, that's something that gets usually played up in a werewolf story. But this is a werewolf story, right? Because Dracula is also a werewolf in a sense. That we have this caged animal in us that could come out and be, terrible. Not only terrible to behold, but can, do great damage.
Yeah, and I think that that speaks to Dracula the character too as well. Like, that's one of the things I love about this section, is that it's hilarious, but there are also like these moments that are chilling, like with things that Dracula says, like, I've made pets, several. It's like, ugh, but with that thought, why'd the wolf escape? Because he wanted to get out. Like, I think that's Dracula too. Like, does Transylvania start to feel like a cage for him? And why does he go? Why does he go to London? Because he wants to and can, and then is driven back to that cage later. It's fascinating.
And the threat that he represents here in England, that, I'm going to let the wild beast out. Everyone, your wild beast, the wild beast in you will be, because you become a vampire, you are this bestial creature that feeds on others. That is exactly what he's going to be doing. So back to Builder and his wife. She has a, well, I never, said the old lady, which is just totally Terry Jones in my head saying that now. And it's tip over his head.
Well, I never. Yeah.
Thank you. Do a better one than that. And then Builder has this interesting moment where he kind of demystifies the wolf. That, he says, in real life, a wolf is only a low creature, not half so clever or bold as a good dog, and not half a quarter so much fight in him. This one ain't been used to fighting or even to providing for himself, and more like he's somewhere around the park, a hiding and a shivering of, and if he thinks at all, wondering where he is to get his breakfast from. That we think of it as a wild beast, but Builder's like, it's just a lone wolf. It's been kept in a zoo. Really taking it down a peg, and very interesting that he's the one that has this kind of knowledge of this that I really like about this. And then he goes and tells some nursemaid goes a walking off with a soldier, leaving of the infant in the perambulator. Well, then I shouldn't be surprised if the census is one babby the less. That's all. I'm making a joke about a wolf eating a baby. Now I'm really liking Builder again. So that is really funny that he would do that. And I think it's a class thing. I think it shows that he'd make a crass joke about that, but it is funny. We one baby less because of this, nursemaid. And then here comes Berserker right back. While the reporter's there, if there ain't old Berserker, come back by himself. The animal itself was as peaceful and well-behaved as that father of all picture wolves, Red Riding Hood's quondam friend. What Red Riding Hood tale did he read that the wolf was her friend, whilst moving her confidence in masquerade? That is a really funny. Funny for us. That is a very Victorian way to read that story, huh?
Yeah.
And he was received and petted like a sort of vulpine prodigal son, as the reporter puts it. I love how he has to get his purple prose out to describe this meeting again. And Builder notices that his head is all cut and full of broken glass. So we get a detail here as to what has happened with Berserker when he's been out. It's all this broken glass and his head's cut, and we'll obviously find out why that is. So Berserker, we have him. We'll get him again in a sense a little later, but we have him in the next chapter, right? No, we got him at the end of this chapter. But that's the Berserker story from the newspaper. I love that that's in here. What a great little change of pace for the narrative for us. So, and now we're back to Seward's diary. Now note that this is 17 September, and the article was 18 September. So we've had Lucy on 17 September saying, I'm going to bed this night. That's what happened on 17. Then we get this newspaper.
I'm feeling
report.
good.
What's that?
Yeah, and Lucy said, I'm going to bed. I'm feeling good. Yeah,
And then we get the next day, in which we get a story of a wolf that escaped that night and then returned on the next day, probably early on the 18th. And then we're going back now to the 17th for Seward. And I love this. This is, even if Stoker confused the dates, it doesn't matter. That you can move the dates all back one day. But the point is that Lucy's been okay for a few days. And this diary entry from Seward is the day before the newspaper article. So we've jumped ahead, and now we're going back to see, what we've gone ahead first. The wolf showing up with the cuts on his head is the kind of the after effects of something that we're going to learn now. What injured the wolf? And I love this because I love lots of TV shows do this now. When they do this, they start their episodes with the after effects. Breaking Bad used to do this all the time. Like they'd start the episode with somebody lying on the ground shot or something really bad happened, and then you go back and you learn what led up to that point. And it's a frequent narrative technique that's used often in TV. And here Stoker using it in little ways in his novel. I'm going to show you the after effects of what happened, and now I'm going to go back and lead up to that moment that you already are aware of. And I think that's very interesting. But before we hit that, what I want to show are Stoker's notes for his first conception of what this chapter was. And I'm going to show this in two pieces. So because these notes are, the notes for this chapter is divided up into kind of two sections. And I'm going to show, I'm going to talk about one section of it, and then we'll talk some about what happens in the chapter itself. And then we'll go back to the notes and then do the chapter again. And this is Book 2, Chapter 5. Now it's Lucy's Diary, A Night of Terror, all that stuff. That's what we're going to come back to. But first, because the bottom of this is what he had for the wolf here, and it's memo: wolf missing from zoological gardens. And I can't continue to read that. I have to look at my notes because I can't read his handwriting. It is, so wolf missing from zoological gardens, has escaped outwards. So, and then he writes this at beginning of chapter. And then at end, made manifest, wolf captured in neighborhood of Lucy's house, dogs killed at the end of it. So he's already thought about this kind of narrative conception that in the beginning I'm going to have this, and then at the end of the chapter we'll see how he's escaped. So he's already figured how I'm playing with the narrative here to do this kind of thing. But we don't get a lot of the details here. And of course, the wolf isn't captured in the neighborhood. He winds up then, you know what, I'm just going to tell the whole story of the wolf's escape and then return home. And then I'll go back and tell Lucy's story, or what happened with this wolf in the meantime at Lucy's house. And we will get to that in a minute, because first we will do the wolf's or Seward's Diary. And because we get Renfield, because it's my drink today. So I have to do my Renfield drink, my Flyman drink. And Renfield comes in, and Dr. Seward's Diary, September 17. In rushed my patient with his face distorted with passion. He's got a dinner knife in his hand. He was too quick and too strong for me, and he cut my left wrist rather severely. However, I got in my right, and he was sprawling on his back on the floor. I don't believe that for a second. My wrist bled freely, and quite a little pool trickled onto the carpet. Read from there.
My wrist bled freely, and quite a little pool trickled onto the carpet. I saw that my friend was not intent on further effort, and occupied myself binding up my wrist, keeping a wary eye on the prostrate figure all the time. When the attendants rushed in, and we turned our attention to him, his employment positively sickened me. He was lying on his belly on the floor, licking up, like a dog, the blood which had fallen from my wounded wrist. He was easily secured, and, to my surprise, went with the attendants quite placidly, simply repeating over and over again, "The blood is the life. The blood is the life."
All righty. So what a great scene with Red. So tiny, inspired a drink, even though I put flies on it. And the fact that Seward decks him with the right, I can imagine that, like, what really happened is Seward's hiding behind the table, Renfield falls, trying to get her, slips and falls, and then Seward has to write it up, heroically, that of course I decked him. But the blood is the life. We have this Renfield's seemingly religious mania. This is not a quote from the Bible. We had this little back and forth too on the Facebook page, people talking about the biblical quotes of, especially from last week in Van Helsing with the corn parable, likened a lot, very much like one of Jesus's parables, but it's never the same thing. And I love how Stoker is creating his own biblical, or his own kind of biblical-like language for his characters, but it's never quite them quoting from scripture, which maybe he thought wouldn't have been a good idea. And it wouldn't have been a good idea to have these characters actually quoting from the Bible, in the late 19th century, but to create his own things. And this blood is the life. It's kind of the opposite of what you can find in the Old Testament, where you're prohibited from blood, but it also very much harkens to Jesus and, drink my blood, eat my body and drink my blood. But he doesn't necessarily say blood is life, but that is the idea that you are, partaking of the God, and you get eternal life for doing that. it's the same idea. Well, it's not the same idea because in that it would be Dracula would be the blood you would take to have eternal life, which is what happens in the novel. But Renfield's, it's very religious-like, and what a great little scene. So, right?
Mhm. Yeah, no, I think that's one of the reasons why I love this chapter, because I think it really shows the virtuosity of Stoker's writing in this book by this point, of like all these shifting tones that we go from this very extended, really funny, interview with this guy that has some that Dracula has some chilling things dropped in. And then all of a sudden there's this very short thing of like, oh my God, suddenly Renfield has a knife and cuts Seward's wrist and lies down on the floor on his stomach like an animal licking up the pool of blood from the carpet. And then it's over. Like it's like this short shock of a scene, and it's just such great structure in writing that it ebbs and flows like this.
Absolutely. I really love it, and it and kind of, and then it just ends, and then we're back to I cannot afford to lose blood at present. I'm overexcited and weary. I need rest.
Which I also think is super funny as well. That line that after you get the blood is the life, the blood is the life, and you're like, oh, that's really creepy and disturbing. And the next thing Seward says is like, I can't be losing blood right now. Like again, it's like swinging tones, which I think is so cool.
You'd think he'd have some commentary on that, but he doesn't. Right back to happily, Van Helsing has not summoned me, so I need not forgo my sleep tonight. I could not well do without it. So he is setting himself up here. But the great little scene, and then this telegram to Van Helsing that was delivered late by 22 hours. Dum dum dum. And it's do not fail to be at Hillingham tonight. Do not fail. That Van Helsing is telling him, but we don't. But Seward doesn't get it. It's delivered late because the right address isn't put on it. And now we'll get the what happened to Lucy this night. And it starts with, this is interesting, memorandum left by Lucy Westenra. And that's really odd that it's obviously a note, but that kind of official sounding word, memorandum, we don't use that word much anymore. We've abbreviated it to memo. You send a memo to somebody. But even when you say a memo, you really mean it's something that's a little bit official. It's not just a note. It is a memo. It is a memorandum. It is something that has some kind of importance. So it's not just something to remember. And Stoker uses the mem all the time, the abbreviation mem in his notes all the time. It's like something I want to remember for later, mem. He just did it with Baron Gould's note. But his characters do it. Jonathan, especially the whole opening of the book, Jonathan is saying, mem, get this recipe for Mina, mem. Ask Dracula about this. So Seward uses mem once. Stoker uses it repeatedly in his notes. And memorandum is this, it's a little radical. Memorandum is this like, there are specific uses for the word in law, and there's specific uses in government. But and I'm wondering what its usage in the 19th century is. Like when you say memorandum in the 19th century, I think it in some way means there's some kind of official kind of take on this, that it's not just a note scribbled down. Yeah, like almost like a lawyer kind of thing. And so what I think is being suggested here is it really obvious that an editor is now doing this. Lucy didn't write memorandum and then write about what happened to her, but that is what the person is calling it who is putting this together, just as all the titles, Lucy Westenra's diary, Dr. Seward's diary, Pall Mall Gazette, article, that someone has come in here now, an editor, but this is and it could easily have been her diary that she had written it in, but she's written this on a separate piece of paper, and we'll find out later that she's enclosed it in herself so it doesn't get lost as to what happened. And it is called a memorandum. And here's the Stoker's notes for this chapter, and here's the first part of it that we can look at now. And he originally had Lucy's diary, and he had A Night of Terror. He's got, like, in his author head, he has a subtitle for this chapter is what this is. Mm-hmm. And it is, and it says, Mem, right here he's got for himself, Mem, attempts of Count Dracula to get into Lucy's room in various ways. And then he has bird and beast and dark. Something scribbled out. It might have been mass that he messed up and then he wrote it again. So bird and beast and dark mass. That's how he gets in. He gets in as a bird. He gets in or like a bat, maybe transformed as a beast. He gets in as a kind of mass, those kind of mist, maybe those little particles. Maybe that's what he's talking about. And then he writes, scratching out window pane. I wonder if he meant at window pane. Scratching out window pane, threatening, finally covers glass with mass of blood, then seems to throw it out of bounds. So this is his original conception of how he's getting in the room. That Dracula trying to figure out how to get in, maybe he tries it in different ways, and then he covers the window with blood. And then the window is gone. It's cast out of bounds. That's just fascinating. I wonder what he really means by that. And then he writes, she is guarded by some spell. Guarded by some spell. Placed, and then he has a question mark. Like, should I, like, guarded by some spell? Is that what I'm going to put here? And then placed accidentally. And then he wrote, described beforehand. So, okay, maybe what I'll have is Van Helsing, maybe with the garlic, or instead he has the garlic. I think this is all pre-garlic. I think before he decided to use garlic to keep him out, he was trying to think of a way that Van Helsing could have kept him out of the room, and then it must have been some kind of spell that Van Helsing had come up with in his books of vampire folklore that was able to keep him out. And now he's decided, scrap all this, and I'm going to use garlic. That's what's keeping Dracula out. And then he has Dracula's rage. Dracula discovers that some spell is here, and then insensibility, and then recovery. Is that Lucy? Is Dracula's rage, does it cause him to become insensible and then to recover? I think it must be her. And then he jumps into Seward's diary. And this is fascinating because what he was originally going to do is Seward's diary. This really shows what an early draft these particular notes are, because this was still at the stage where Lucy is actually engaged to Seward. And also there are several moments in the early plot where Dracula comes to visit Seward in the asylum. This is how the Dracula's first introduced in the novel for the people in England, is that he comes in and he's like, oh, I'm the guy that lives over at Carfax. This happens in stage plays, the Broadway play for the Lugosi was in, and the movie, the Dracula 79 with Frank Langella, the one we just talked about last week, the 1968 from Mystery Imagination with Denholm Elliott. Dracula's already at the asylum, and this is how he meets everyone. But he has Dracula visits asylum here, stumbles on threshold. I love that he was going to bring that in, that Dracula was going to have a hard time dealing with the threshold of a place, as happens in Coleridge's Christabel. And he was really going to bring that detail right into the book. And then he just has effect on Madman with Fly theory. So this is something that happens in other adaptations too, that Dracula consults with Seward and says, oh, I know how to fix your patient here, kind of thing. And what it does is, it's a way for adaptations to kind of bring in that Renfield Dracula connection a little earlier usually, and also make their connection believable in a sense, that Dracula is directly affecting him and going for him. But that was his original conception of the novel. And let us look at what actually happens on Lucy's Night of Terror, as Stoker himself called it, in this memorandum. And I'm trying to think of a good place. I'm gonna have you read a little later. I'll just go through it, what happens at the beginning. I write this and leave it to be seen so that no one may by any chance get into trouble through me. This is an exact record of what took place tonight. I feel I am dying of weakness and have barely strength to write, but it must be done if I die in the doing. So she starts it off like right away, riveting, like, this is an extreme moment. And it's also a little bit of that, what, let me write it down exactly as it happened, as Seward said earlier. And she's doing that kind of thing here too.
Yes, she's become one of the active narrators now. Finally.
Yes.
Mm-hmm.
And for the first time, because other times, all her diary entries have just been not to us, not telling a story. She's writing to herself. That with the idea that people aren't going to read this. I'm telling you how, I'm just writing about how I feel, what happened to me, but I'm writing for myself. This is Lucy the first time writing for us, telling us a story, telling someone else a story as to what happened. So that's a good moment to point out. She was waked by flapping at the window, which had begun after that sleepwalking on the cliff at Whitby when Mina saved me, and which now I know so well. So I love this. So Lucy's putting it all together. Like, this is a whole chain of events that has been happening ever since that moment. This is the final one, in a sense. It's not, but it is. Outside in the shrubbery, I heard a sort of howl like a dog's, but more fierce and deeper. I went to the window and looked out, but could see nothing except the big bat, which had evidently been buffeting its wings against the window. Were there no exterminators in the 19th? Did you not call a bat an exterminator to get rid of a bat that's bothering your house? So the flapping and buffeting came at the window, and her mother comes in, and she was startled, and her mother comes in. Read that. I feared that she might catch cold sick. Her mother comes in. Read that.
Sure thing. Yeah. Presently the door opened and mother looked in, seeing by my moving that I was not asleep, came in and sat by me. She said to me, even more sweetly and softly than her wont, I was uneasy about you, darling, and came in to see that you were all right. I feared she might catch cold sitting there and asked her to come in and sleep with me, so she came into bed and lay down beside me. She did not take off her dressing gown, for she said she would only stay a while and then go back to her own bed. As she lay there in my arms and I in hers, the flapping and buffeting came to the window again. She was startled and a little frightened and cried out, "What is that?" I tried to pacify her and at last succeeded, and she lay quiet, but I could hear her poor dear heart still beating terribly. After a while, there was the low howl again out in the shrubbery, and shortly after, there was a crash at the window, and a lot of broken glass was hurled on the floor. The window blind blew back with the wind that rushed in, and in the aperture of the broken panes, there was the head of a great gaunt gray wolf. Mother cried out in fright and struggled up into a sitting posture and clutching wildly at anything that would help her. Amongst other things, she clutched the wreath of flowers that Dr. Van Helsing insisted on my wearing around my neck and tore it away from me. For a second or two, she sat up, pointing at the wolf, and there was a strange and horrible gurgling in her throat. Then she fell over, as if struck with lightning, and her head hit my forehead and made me dizzy for a moment or two. The room and all round seemed to spin round. I kept my eyes fixed on the window, but the wolf drew his head back, and a whole myriad of little specks seems to come blowing in through the broken window and wheeling and circling round like the pillar of dust that travelers describe when there is a simoon in the desert. I tried to stir, but there was some spell upon me, and dear mother's poor body, which seemed to grow cold already, for her dear heart had ceased to beat, weighed me down, and I remembered no more for a while.
All right. Good reading too. And a great scene. One of the most exciting scenes in the book. I really, it really is for me. And it begins with, you know, the flapping and buffeting at the window. It's Dracula. It's a bat. You know, the mother, you know, wakes up. You know, what is that? And then you hear the low howl outside, which is who is the wolf. Now, Justin had written me a question here, and this is something that frequently gets asked, I think, and he writes, perhaps this is small potatoes, but I have to ask, does Stoker want us to believe this wolf has extraordinary powers to the extent he can leap from the ground floor and then burst through a second floor window? I checked carefully, and Lucy's bedroom is on the second floor. We do get that a couple times. So they go up to Lucy's room at one point, a later chapter, they ascend to Lucy's room. So it is definitely a second floor window. It's interesting in the original typescript, which you can see what he's cut out in the drafts of Dracula. One of the lines he cut out was, after a while there was a low howl again out in the shrubbery, and then a pattering of quick paws on the veranda. And shortly after, there was a crash at the window. And he cut out of the novel, there was a pattering of quick paws on the veranda. So there seems to be some kind of veranda outside her window, maybe.
Yeah.
Or maybe it's under and it can go on the veranda and then make its way up from there. I think that seems to be what's maybe in Stoker's head, that there is a way for the wolf to do this and then get up from the veranda and to burst in through the window. But then he cut that line out, so that's not that evident. Not that it's that 100% evident with that, but the wolf does seem to be able to get there to the second window, to the second floor window, because of that. Wolf comes crashing through the window, and this apparently is in Stoker's way of dealing with all this, or Dracula's way of dealing with this. That's not a spell that is keeping him out. It's the garlic. And how can he get through the garlic? He's just got a wolf that's going to get him through the garlic. The wolf busts through the window, and obviously in doing that, the garlic must have been displaced from the window. We know that her mother has pulled the garlic from her throat, and he needs the wolf to break through the window to go through, to get past the garlic there. So Lucy doesn't spell that out. That would be, I mean, she could have, if she had said and the garlic fell, it would have seemed maybe a little heavy-handed here, Stoker trying to let us know that what happened. But I think you can piece it together. That's why he has the wolf. The wolf needs to get through the window because that's where the garlic is, and then Dracula can come in. Which means he's been invited. He has already been invited. That's how he can get into this house. So someone definitely invited him in. I think it's the maids. There's the wolf. I mean, what a crazy scene this is for her in bed. Like a wolf to come busting in your window. I mean, it's batshit crazy, you know? Like more than a bat coming in your window. A wolf coming in your window is something that will never happen. And it happened to her. Mother pulls the things away, and then the room seems to spin. She hits her head, the room's spinning. And then the whole myriad of little specks seem to come blowing in through the broken window and wheeling and circling round like a pillar of dust. This is what Jonathan saw, right? With the twice he saw this, I think, in the castle. This is how the vampires materialize before him out of this dust. And this is Dracula in a mist. Later, Van Helsing would tell people he can turn into a mist. He doesn't mean like a wet mist, like that. This is what he means, because we've seen it now. This is the third time that this kind of particles that looks like dust can come in, and Lucy remembers no more, but she wakes up, and then one of the things she does then comment on after she wakes up is the nightingales. Isn't that so gorgeous? It's
so beautiful.
Yeah, it's this little detail that Seemingly just outside, a nightingale was singing. I was dazed and stupid with pain and terror and weakness, but the sound of the nightingale seemed like the voice of my dead mother come back to comfort me. Um, that little detail really adds poignancy to this. It's also a kind of dream-like thing to happen that this, or maybe in a sense it's their kind of heightened awareness on Lucy's part now. Maybe there's some kind of heightened awareness now that she's, been attacked again and is becoming a vampire, that she could hear this, or kind of like it's the detail of it, it's the clarity of it is what happens. It's just waking up, and maybe that's part of her being a vampire now, or becoming a vampire, I should say. And then we find, and then the maids come in. The sounds seem to have awakened the maids too. Well, I hope so. I hope the maids heard a wolf busting in through your window. And they come in and they're screaming. They lifted the body of her mother, covered up with a sheet. And then they were so frightened that I told them to go and get a glass of wine. And they all go out. And then I was surprised. The maids did not come back. I called them, but there was no answer. And then she goes out and she finds the maids, the four maids, passed out, and the decanter smelt of laudanum.
Mm-hmm.
The mother had a bottle of laudanum for her own uses, and that was empty. And the servants, whom someone has drugged, so here's where it gets complicated, and I can't quite work it out, right? The maids, I think, are the ones that invited Dracula in to begin with. But it's not like he has power over them. He's not turning them. He can't put them in, he's not putting them in a trance. So he just needs to get rid of, he's drugged the wine. Then it must be after he went to Lucy and fed on her, he must have gone in and drugged the wine.
Mm-hmm.
Is this just a plot strand that Stoker forgot about and never followed up on? Or does this make sense that Dracula would do that to get the maids out of the way later? Now, he doesn't know that Van Helsing and Seward are going to show up the next day, and maybe Dracula will come back the next night. All the servants will still be asleep, maybe. I don't know. Why he would think the servants would have taken the wine? Does it mean that was maybe meant for her mother, that her mother would have a drink of wine and go to sleep, so he would have easier access to her because the mother would have been passed out? Can you make anything of this, Josh?
I mean, I think it's one of those interesting things in this book where there is sort of a missing piece that kind of tantalizes you and is never answered, but is fun to speculate about. And there are many, but this is definitely one of them. I think too, you wonder, by this point, did Dracula get to Mrs. Westenra somehow? Because it is her medication. And Lucy does say when her mother comes in that she's talking even sweeter than she usually does. Like there's something different. Lucy knows there's something different there. And that, as someone pointed out in the chat, it is kind of odd that the Mrs. Westenra specifically pulls the garlic from around Lucy's neck. So that's done. That's a lot to leave to chance to have to happen. But
maybe it's also too, because then at the end of this, she kind of passes out again. No, he comes back. He's not done. Maybe that's what it is. Maybe he feeds on her, and then he realizes, or maybe he doesn't feed on her. Maybe he hasn't fed on her. No, he hasn't fed on her yet. What am I saying? This is stupid. He hasn't fed on her yet. She's woken up.
Mm-hmm.
And he hasn't fed on her yet. What he's done is he's broken into the room, and then he's just gone and put the laudanum in the wine. And now it's after the maids are passed out. Now he comes back. And this is when he feeds on her. So he's actually, this is
anymore.
all part of him setting the stage
Yes.
of his final feeding on Lucy. That
Mm-hmm.
he needs to, you know, and it's not his final, but it's, you know, what he wants to be his final feeding on Lucy is that I got to wipe out this whole house. These people are putting garlic up. They're sleeping in bed with her. They're guarding her in the room, sleeping in a couch, doctors. I got to get rid of everybody in the house. So I know I'm going to bring a wolf. I'll bust through the window, take care of the garlic. I'm going to go drug the wine, take care of the servants. Now I'm going to feed on her, and this will be it. Nobody's going to save her. Mom's dead. Servants asleep. She'll die after I feed on her, and then she'll become a vampire. Maybe that's it.
Yeah.
I've solved it. Watson, bring the needle. Yes. So that's it. But that is the succession, because he hasn't fed on her yet, and now he feeds on her, because then again she hears the low howl of the wolf through the broken window. Read the last paragraph.
Yeah. All right. Alone with the dead, I dare not go out, for I can hear the low howl of the wolf through the broken window. The air seems full of specks, floating and circling in the draught from the window, and the lights burn blue and dim. What am I to do? God shield me from harm this night. I shall hide this paper in my breast, where they shall find it when they come to lay me out. My dear mother gone, it is time that I go too. Goodbye, dear Arthur, if I should not survive this night. God keep you, dear, and God help me.
A great cliffhanger ending for a chapter. We're back to that as we were earlier on in this book.
And I think I love that this last word of Lucy so much, you know, because I think that that's the character that never appears in any of the film adaptations of this book. Like the evolution that I think that Lucy takes from the time we first meet her to now as this woman, like, who's gone through this horrible suffering and like her mother dying, but at the end I think does have agency. Like, I think that's why it's interesting that it's labeled as a memorandum, you know, because she says at the end, like, it is time I die too. Like, they'll find it when they lay me out. Like, in some ways, it's a suicide note. In some ways, like,
kind of last will, kind of, you know, my last thoughts. Yeah.
Yeah, like, because she's not saying like, this has been a horrible night, but I'm going to fight on. She's like, I'm going to make the choice. It's time for whatever is going to come, which I think is really interesting and is a nuance of Lucy that I don't think gets talked about a lot.
Yeah, good. There were a couple questions earlier on that I never got to, and I'm going to answer them on our Facebook group, Sundays with Dracula, from Carrie, about Seward and Van Helsing, and somebody asked a question about Stoker being influenced by the wolves of Ossory, which I'm not exactly sure what that is, and I'm going to look that up. That was from Elizabeth, so I will answer those questions online. Yeah, a great ending, and Lucy is a character who is going through this great ordeal, and it is there's a lot more to her, and it's great to finally get these instances of her diary and her own thoughts and her own perspective on what is going on, not filtered through Mina even, but especially not filtered through the men, which is nice. So great. Well, Dracuphiles, thank you all for tuning in today. I really thought we'd go even longer than this. There's so much packed here. Didn't know how long our rabbit holes would take us, but thank you for tuning in today. Or if you're watching this program on replay, we'll be posting this recording on our website later. And we have, as I mentioned, the Sundays with Dracula Facebook group where we can continue the conversation. So look us up on Facebook, join in the conversation if you haven't already. I'm always available to answer questions via email. Next week's co-hosts plural, joining me will be Sheffield Gothic's Mary Going and the newly minted PhD, Lauren Nixon, congrats to Lauren on the confirmation of her PhD thesis, which is called This Trade of Death, War and the Figure of the Soldier in Gothic Fiction 1764 to 1823. It was confirmed and her PhD is minted now. So Dr. Nixon will be here with Mary Going for the next episode next week. If you're looking for more virtual engagement in our quarantine world, head on over to the Rosenbach website. Check out all the virtual offerings we have. If you register for the Harry Potter course, or if you register for any sessions of the Read the Blood of Dracula, I would be more grateful than Renfield in a room full of bleeding people. Josh, thank you for being here today.
Thank you. So nice to be back. I'll see y'all soon.
Yeah, excellent. Good luck on working on the book. I look forward to that. I look forward to your next appearance here on the show. Everyone, join us next week on Sundays with Dracula for Chapter 12, where we'll have yet another blood transfusion. Another doctor with a ridiculous amount of letters after his name. Quincy will come in, and we have the return of one of Stoker's favorite adjectives, voluptuous. Once again, will be played out by Tucker Christine's Pleated Gazelle song, Storm at Whitby. Farewell, everyone. And in the words of our friend Dracula, go safely and leave something of the happiness you bring. Bye-bye. Bye-bye.